Welcome to the Therapist Book Club, where two therapists dive into their favorite books and the powerful mental health themes they uncover.
Whether you're here for literary inspiration, therapeutic tools, or just some lighthearted conversation, you've found the right place.
So get cozy and let's dive into the pages together. Hello, welcome to the first episode of the Therapist Book Club with me, Kirsten Jacobson, and Tiana McCall, where us as two therapists are going to break down the books that we're reading and what we see in them and the connection with the mental health piece. So before we start, Tiana, let's tell them a little bit about us so they kind of know what lens we'll be taking as we're looking at these books. So tell us about you.
So I'm an LCSW. Both of us are in Utah, by the way. But I'm an LCSW. Most of my career has been in the K-12 education system. But I've recently branched off and I've started a private practice where I treat primarily trauma. And I treat from kids around 8 years old up to a 99-year-old grandma. So the wide range, but most of my clients are middle 30s, I would say, is kind of the range that I treat. And I take a very, very much like a trauma informed lens. Everything that I do has a focus on trauma pretty much and how that might be impacting my clients' daily functioning. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah. And I come up through the community mental health section of life, which is similar to K through 12, I guess. And I'm a licensed clinical social worker here. I own a private practice in Layton, Utah. And I'm doing my PhD right now in traumatology. So of course, trauma is going to be a big one, but I also am really interested on the impacts of trauma on the brain. And so that's probably what might come out in all of this. Those are our disclaimers. We are therapists. We are not your therapists. We are not these books therapists. No, anyway. But today we're talking about Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, which I love. You and I pretty much had our own book club back when we were reading this book, and I couldn't keep up with you. Tiana reads really fast, so
I listen to a lot of books in my ear while I'm caring for my children.
yes, yeah. So tell us about the book.
Yes. Okay. So this is a book about a 20-something-year-old woman. She's pretty quirky. She's got some interesting habits and routines, and she's very isolated in the story for most of the story. She grew up in a pretty abusive home with her mother. And so a lot of her experiences in the present, like in the story that the book is telling, is colored by her trauma, her past with her mother. And everything she does and doesn't do is influenced by her past. And as the story goes along, you kind of get to know a little bit more about that history. So it's kind of like uncovering some of the layers as you go through the book. There's like a big turning point in the book where she befriends somebody at her work. And then they kind of help this older gentleman, and they bond through that, and she starts developing these friendships that she's never really had in her life. And it is kind of just a story of her growing and expanding and healing from her lifelong trauma. It's a really good book.
And she's such a fun character. Like the first few pages, I think I started the book first, right? And then I was texting you. I'm like, oh my gosh, you got to read this. This is such an interesting, like I was like, I want to know what you think about this Eleanor gal because she is fun.
Yeah. In fact, I remember you were like, what would you diagnose her with?
Yes.
When I was reading it, I was like, oh. So when I started reading it, there was a lot of rigidity that she had, lots of very extreme like routines that she wanted to follow, and she had to follow in order
Structure for
to
herself, like
structure.
self-implemented.
She had a substance use problem. She drank a lot of alcohol, specifically vodka. I think only vodka.
Yeah. That was part of her like ritual of it all, right?
And only alone. She didn't really love social drinking, like it was a thing she did by herself.
Yeah.
So we never really landed on a diagnosis yet, but there was some little themes of autism poking around in there. But
Yeah. She reminded me so much of like female presenting adult with autism. And I had to Google it, and the author says no, she does not have autism. Um, I don't know that I so boys and girls are or male and female are going to present differently with autism. She just kind of reminded me of the clients I've worked with that
Yeah.
present on that spectrum. But so I know you have some themes that we've kind of we can dive into with these books. So tell us like what some of the themes are of this book that relate mental health wise.
Yeah, so I mentioned in the summary that a major theme was that she was very lonely and a lot like she was not just alone, but she felt alone. So I think there can be a difference, a nuance of like you might thrive in being alone and it might feel very regenerative and healing to be alone. And then there's the loneliness of like, no, I want people around me. I want company. And she was very lonely.
Mhm.
So that's a theme for sure. Trauma for sure. And we can dig into some of that of what like some of her childhood experiences and the genre of trauma she experienced. Resilience and healing. So the story follows an arc of her kind of coming to some healing throughout the story. So those are kind of the themes: loneliness, trauma, resilience, and healing.
If you had to pick like a favorite part, what would you say was your favorite part?
So there's a part kind of when the story starts turning that she has like a full-on breakdown and like she hits like rock bottom and then she comes out of it and I just like that arc of like she starts to see the light
Hmm.
eventually and she starts to like reach out more and more and starts to see that like she's not flawed. It's like this is just a part of her story and that there might be other things she has to do in order to keep progressing, but that's kind of I like the turning point. I like to see like, okay, something is shifting, something has changed. So that's kind of the point that I like. I don't know how much detail to give because I don't want to give the whole story away, but there is a point in the story where things shift for her and she starts kind of coming out of her darkness.
I loved the nail salon. When she went to the nail salon and got her makeover or whatever. I just love how quirky she was. She just is so, do you know what I love about this book is it's a story about underdogs finding each other, right? Like doesn't she describe her friend at work as being like smelly or dirty or unkempt, something like that. She
Yeah, but almost like the way I pictured it is like she was being hard on him, like he was just kind of an average guy, but she had like meticulous standards.
Yes, it's this is not a like Colleen Hoover where the main characters are Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni or however you say his last name, but this is just your average people going about their life, having an interesting life and befriending this old. I loved that they befriended the old man too. But
Yes. I remember, yeah. I loved their relationship with the old man. But
yeah,
you know, the question I had was like, what drew her friend, what was his name, Raymond?
Raymond, yeah.
What drew him to her?
Yeah. I mean, did he have you know, in the story they talk about like she almost felt like he just didn't have other options.
Yeah.
Then we find out that he actually did have other
Yeah.
options. And so what did draw him? I guess we don't know enough. That is a great question for him. Is he somebody who likes to take care of people?
Maybe. Like he saw her like loneliness.
I mean, he was a rescuer in the book for sure. Yeah, I'm like maybe
She was kind of sour to him for
right,
most
like
of
that
the
he
story.
genuinely liked her, you know,
Yeah.
like, he was happy to see her. Like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what, you know, I wish we knew more about his life. Like, what was he, how lonely was he as well? I like your definition of loneliness because I'm like, man, I work with a ton of clients who are not alone but feel lonely. And they have lots of people around and they're buried in that sea of people. These were a couple of people, the older man, that they were actually alone and
Yeah.
isolated. And so Yeah, I wish we had known more about Ray. He sounds like a really, he sounds like, if I'm being really honest, he sounds like the guy at work that is always at work and is super nice. And you probably just walk right past him and
Mhm.
forget he's there, you know?
Didn't he have like a little, like he had a friend, like he had friends and like a family, like a sister or somebody, or like he had some relationships with others and he got along with the people at work generally, like wasn't in any sort of like group or like clique or anything at work. But I think that isn't, I think that's part, one of the themes I wanted to touch on was like the healing process in relationship and how powerful relationship can be to healing. And that was a huge theme in this story of like, as soon as, well, as the story progresses and she and Ray have developed this relationship, that's when she starts being able to see like, maybe I'm not so horrible.
Mm,
And maybe like, maybe my past has been coloring all of my experiences.
yeah. But she actually pushes him away first, right? Because she had such, so we know relationships were impacted from a young age. I won't give away the full extent because it's something that develops over time, but she does say right up front that she was in foster care. She was removed from her parents. Um, and she experiences grief and loss and whatever, right? And she doesn't have the best foster experiences. And now she's alone as an adult and she has a caseworker who checks in with her, was it like once a month or something like that? But so when, this is a person who never got the opportunity to experience healthy, fulfilling, nurturing relationships, right? And I think that's why it's key. When I'm working with, I treat a lot of the like trauma that happens, like childhood trauma, whether you're a child experiencing or adult who experienced childhood trauma. And I was just thinking, like, when we talk about stages of development, that's so important. And some people will miss out on developing those appropriately, and it's not their fault. It's due to the caregivers around them. But the therapy is we have to learn that development.
Yeah.
And that's when you're talking about the relationships, that's like the biggest thing, like she didn't get that positive development in her life. And she heals through these relationships that she starts to experience, but she's often very standoffish, pushes
Not
people
trusting.
away. What's that excerpt we were just reading that was she said about the two drinks?
Oh, I think I have it up. No, thank you, I said. I don't want to accept a drink from you because then I would be obliged to purchase one for you in return, and I'm afraid I'm simply not interested in spending 2 drinks worth of time with you.
So she's very standoffish, very pushed away. I actually love this theme of this is what I loved about the book is it was just fun. Like on just the top layer of it all is just she's just funny and it's fun to read. What there is this one about her plants. She loved her plants so much.
Isn't that interesting that like,
Oh, go ahead. I'm gonna see
isn't
if
that
I can hear
interesting that she had this love of an inanimate object and like that was where she felt safe and
that.
secure was with these plants.
Yeah. Oh, here's from when she goes when she has her whole makeover.
Huh?
Was this how it worked then? Successful social integration? Was it really that simple? You just wear lipstick, go to the hairdressers and alternate the clothing you wear. Remember she wears the same thing.
I remember her also going to work after her makeover and people were like, "Oh my gosh, she's actually pretty."
Yes.
Like they
We're
were
so
shocked.
shocked.
Uh,
Oh,
Okay, so I'm curious then, like when you think about this from a therapist perspective and you have clients who you know have experienced this, like they haven't developed this part or they didn't have this care and connection with caregivers early on, how does that play into your role as their therapist. Can you facilitate that relationship? Do you encourage them to go seek these relationships outside? Like, how would you treat this? How would you heal this early childhood wound?
Yeah. So really it's a two-part. I look at it as two-part. We're going to do a lot of work in the therapy room, but like I once I had a mentor, I can't remember exactly who. I just remember it's in like supervision or something. And they were saying how the game of life is played outside of our offices. And so she broke it down and she's like, but it's not the day-to-day living that's the game. The game is our big moments that we have to like be focused and shine for. Outside of our office is actually their daily practice. What they're doing in our office is watching tape and meeting with their coach.
Making a plan.
Yeah. And so in our office, we're watching the tape, we're reviewing what has happened in the past to find any patterns or find any areas that we can intervene. Um, we're breaking down some of the patterns, we're learning new skills. If Eleanor specifically or a person like her came to my office, I would be doing EMDR with her. I'd want to be, how do I reprocess these negative cognitions? What people are scary. Like she loves inanimate objects. She is very rule. She doesn't want to deviate. This is all very protective, right? So she's not open to, I mean, like that's the hard thing about relationships is sometimes we do hurt. And so we have to first be open to that. We have to open Eleanor up to the fact that you could experience care and connection. You have to tolerate that because that does come with risk. And secondly, now we need to get out there and start to make connections. So I would be comboing for the other therapists out there. Specifically, treatment modality would be reprocessing some of this and then future templates with her before she's going like speed dating or I don't know. Could you imagine Eleanor Oliphant speed dating?
No.
She would say, I'm sorry, you are not a to drink person. Let that now be for any of our listeners, if they are still out dating, let that be a litmus test.
You are not 2 drinks worth of my time.
Yes.
So what would you say if we're okay? So let's go on this EMDR rabbit hole. What would you think are some of her negative cognitions or negative like core woundings that she has? Like, is it like a worthiness thing and like I'm unlovable? Is it like the world is not safe? Like, where do you think she lies based on how the story told her?
I think there's probably a couple clusters happening. And one is, yeah, there's probably some safety issues, some safety and control.
Yeah.
She's very controlling with her experience in life because a lot of, you find by the end of the book, a lot of it was out of her control. And it is true. I mean, she does, in the beginning of the book, she starts hinting at this. Like a lot of this was out of her control. She is not the one who caused harm in her life, although that is kind of also a journey she has to go on to decide, was it my fault? That's a really typical experience, I think, with trauma. And that's the second cluster of, can I view myself as like a victim, or like the party that did not do the harm? Can I view myself as a young child who was out of control and harmed by this? And can I now be the confident, resilient caretaker adult that I am?
Yeah, and maybe we can dig into a little bit about why a child would take on that stance of owning the
Mm.
abuse that they've experienced. Like in my work, I've noticed a lot of the adults that I treat with childhood trauma take on that blame of like, well, I was just a terrible kid. Like I was so awful to my parents. So no wonder they kind of treated me this way, or no wonder they were yelling at me all the time because I was naughty, I was bad, and I broke all the rules, whatever. But
Mhm.
where does that self-blame come from? And why? Why do kids take on that self-blame?
I think that's just like the area of development that they're in when this stuff happens, right? Is they're looking to their parents to tell them their value and worth. So the world becomes a little egocentric for kids. The world does revolve around, I mean, the world revolves
Naturally.
around my kids.
I think it can be really scary for a kid too to be like, no, my parent is actually just terrible. Because
Mhm.
like if my parent is terrible, what does that mean? Like it makes the world more unsafe. So I have to kind of take on the blame of like, if I could just fix myself as a kid, and then maybe my parents don't have to be so mean to me or don't have to be abusive to me.
But you know what, back up even more to that too. And I see a lot of people with perinatal mood disorders, and their fear is like that they haven't attached with their babies. And we always go through and talk about science tells us that attachment happens by if your baby cries, you feed them. If your baby cries, they change their diaper. So parents that are bad are probably still forming attachments with their children. They're probably even like I've worked in rehab facilities, and those parents can be on drugs and still be changing the diaper, holding their baby when they're crying, and so the baby's making appropriate attachment to their parent, right? So that child like can't look at it differently. They cannot look at their parent as bad because there is biological markers that make them look to their parent as for their value. And like there's just it's not developmentally possible for a child to say, oh, you know what's happening right now, my parents are making bad decisions.
Right.
It's just like they just are not capable of that.
Well,
And
and then if you get stuck in a stage of development, you're going to be stuck there even as your body grows.
right.
Even as you grow into this adult body, if you haven't matured in those earlier stages in a healthy way, you're going to maintain those same kind of negative or maladaptive behaviors or patterns of functioning into adulthood. And that's where that work that happens in the therapy room comes into play, is that you kind of jump backwards. Like let's go back and try to like redo this developmental stage.
Mm-hmm. You wrote in our notes today an excerpt that she talks about some of this, right? She said, this is Eleanor. It was the first time I'd had my hand held by another adult. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for me in as long as I could remember.
Mhm.
And you're speaking to, like to that too, right? Like, ugh, all he had done was just hold her hand.
I know,
She,
and I think about that like in the therapy office too. So I do only virtual practice. So I don't have the opportunity to have like that. Like I can't give my clients a hug. I don't, everybody has kind of a different opinion on hugging their clients, but I think I would probably hug my client if they wanted it and like it would be helpful to their healing. But I don't have that opportunity. So I have to kind of find other ways to like make that physical connection to my clients or that bond with them as I'm working with them virtually. And it is a little trickier
yeah.
virtually. But you see clients in person. How do you kind of do that physical, like physical touch is important, I think, in relationship. And how do you kind of take on that? Like, how do you handle that when you know that that is kind of something that that person might need for healing?
Yeah, I mean, I think as therapists, we care about our clients. We want to nurture the relationship, but also I can't be the end all for them, or else you can't move on. You can't graduate from therapy. So yeah, it's really looking for those safe places. And you know, I believe in animal assisted therapy. I think like we do kind of see Eleanor do some of that in the book, or even like with her plans, things like that, right? We do see her um yeah, make those changes. And so I actually believe in emotional support animals and service animals and things like that. Those are very non-threatening ways to begin for those who've been extremely isolated, you know.
Feel safe.
Because yeah, my fear is too. So working in foster care system at one point, I had a client that reminded me so much of Eleanor Oliphant, and because I was really concerned. She was vulnerable of somebody like I'm so glad Raymond was kind and
Have
nice.
ulterior motives. Yeah.
Yes, because I think like my client I worked with was super vulnerable to um, needing that care and that love, and having physical reactions, not in a weird way, but like we all like long for that, you know. Um,
Mhm.
and so yeah, it can put people at risk at times. But yeah, I think animal assisted therapy is fantastic. It's a beautiful thing, looking for these safe experiences of it. Um, I don't know. When I'm working with kids, sometimes they do hug me,
Yeah.
and I'm like, it is what it is.
I always hugged my therapist when I was in therapy. I had seen her for years and years and years, and I hugged her. It helped me to feel safer. But she always asked. It was always like within my control. So I think there's some controversy in that, maybe.
There is, you can hear it in our voices as
I
therapists. We're like,
know.
what do
No.
I
But
do?
but even like a hand on the shoulder or offering a box of tissues or like
Yeah,
sitting closer to the person so they can feel your presence. Like all of that is relationally healing.
yes. It's just like a co-regulation. Sometimes we can't regulate on our own. We need somebody to help anchor us. And a lot of times therapists, we are that for our clients. But again, we don't want to be it the only thing, right? Because we do want them to graduate. We want them to feel better and feel like they are the capable humans that we see them to be. I like so Eleanor in her book, she compares and contrasts like the seeking of help or needing help with healing. And at one point, she says, you can't leave wounds untreated. They'll fester and you'll get gangrene, and then we'll have to cut off your foot.
Huh?
There's nothing in therapy. I can't think of anything that we would just cut off, right? Like, if it was that easy. So,
Okay, but I think as people who are wounded, we theoretically cut things off in the form of dissociation or parts that are exile. Like we do have parts of us that we say we're not touching that. That's going to go away into a vault that we're never going to open up again. So
yeah,
like in therapy, I don't think we're not working on that, but like in our own psyche, sometimes we do cut off parts of us because
yeah,
it's too unbearable to
that
admit.
is true. In therapy, often we're looking at reconnecting to these parts that we've cut off. Um, yeah, because we can't leave them festering. They will fester and they will come out in some way. But I love then she says, this is towards is this the last line of the book?
I don't remember.
I can't remember. It might be. It's towards the end though, I know. She said, there are days when I feel like I might die from an overdose of satisfaction and sheer contentment. Like Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine.
Yeah. I love how she says there are days and it's not all like butterflies and rainbows. Like some days still suck. And like she's still overwhelmed by everything that she's experienced. But also, like when you start turning on the lights to some of your pain, it allows you to turn on the lights to the joy. And in the beginning of the book, she was miserable.
Yeah.
She didn't have really any joy.
Yeah. What was it? She drinking like as soon as she got off work on Friday, she would be drunk until Monday.
Yeah. So like I think this quote speaks to like the process of healing. Yes, you have to feel all of the pain, but it
Hmm.
also allows you to feel all the joy eventually too.
That's awesome. Should we leave it on that?
Yeah, I love
I
that.
love this journey, this Eleanor journey. She's amazing. I would love to be her friend.
I know.
Well, she'd be a quirky friend, wouldn't she?
She would, yeah, she would be a friend that you would have to understand, like be around her enough to understand her and
Yeah.
like not be offended by her. Because
Don't take it personal.
yes, yes, yeah. That's why I was so curious about Raymond is like, what did he like about her in the beginning? Because she was sour and mean to him. And like, why did he keep showing up? But I think you're onto something. Like, he must have had some sort of like healer or giver kind of trait in him to like see her suffering and want to help or want to like, I don't know, but she would be an interesting friend.
Yes. So what's the one piece of wisdom you can take from this book?
I would say from the viewpoint of Eleanor, like if you're an Eleanor or if you are like somebody who's experienced really hard things in their life, I think the takeaway is like, the world doesn't have to be so scary. There are good, kind people out there that want to be around you. And it's just a matter of like that 8 seconds of bravery that you need to go and like practice finding them. And like, you deserve connection and love from people too. And like, your trauma is not your fault, I guess would be like my takeaways. What about you?
I think my takeaway is for other therapists, this is such a great example of we treat the person and not the symptoms in therapy. Because you could drown in treating you. I don't, in the beginning of this book, she's like looking for medication and she's learned how to say the right things to her doctor because she likes to, when she's not at work, she zones out. Like you could dig into the substance use, but until you treat Eleanor, it's not going to treat the substance stuff.
Or if you wanted, like, if you were really convinced she had some sort of autism spectrum disorder, you could spend a lot of time on like helping her build all these like social skills. But if you don't treat the underlying trauma that she has, those social skills or those social interactions are still going to be terrifying, no matter like you could practice and practice and practice all day, but like there's an underlying wound there
Yeah.
that's making it so scary for her to connect.
Yeah, that's what I always preach is like we have to treat the person. Can't treat the symptoms. We don't treat the diagnosis. We work with that person. We treat that person as a whole. And this is such a great example of why treating the person for who she is helps her be the person that she is, right?
Yeah.
Like when she does her treatment, we don't change her. She is who she is.
Yeah.
And that's good. That's great. She can be who she is. There's people who love her and care for her just the way she is. So yeah, I love that story. I loved that takeaway from this story. I'm glad it ended that way.
Yeah. I loved Eleanor. I
Eleanor
want
was
to see this
great.
in a movie.
It was definitely was such a ride. She took me on a ride for sure. Awesome. Well, we'll be back with our next one.
Okay. Thanks for joining us on the Therapist Book Club. We hope today's conversation inspired you to explore new stories and perspectives.
Don't forget to follow us for more episodes, share your favorite books with us, and join the conversation on how books and mental health connect on our social media channels.
Until next time, keep reading, keep growing, and remember, your story matters.